Thank you very much for this kind introduction. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure, partly because it's very close to Nottingham, so it's a nice morning journey. It wasn't troublesome. Partly, when I
carry on, Zoltán.
Yeah. When I received the invitation, I looked at the topic of the conference, and one of the featured bullet-pointed themes was frameworks. And then I thought, and I looked at the date, and it was kind of November, and I thought, that's weird. That almost exactly coincides with the publication of this book, which I just happened to have with me. Which is called basically Motivational Currents in Language Learning, Frameworks for Focused Intervention. And so I thought, that is perhaps a sign. And then I thought, and this is exactly the autumn when my son starts studying in Sheffield universities. So I thought, that's another good sign. So in about 5 minutes, I emailed Kat saying that I'm happy to accept the invitation. So I'm very pleased to be here. And I'd like to talk to you something about which is very, very new and very, very personal to me. This has been my life for the last year and a half, and it's this motivational currents. Let me just give you first a short description of what they are so that you know what it's going to be. And then I'm going to give you a longer description. Then I'm going to look at a kind of analyze this new theory a bit more. And then I will end up by giving you actual frameworks, which, for classroom applications, 7 frameworks. Now, of course, the problem with all these talks, I've got 45 minutes and I'm under strict instructions not to go beyond that. So I can really just kind of give you an overview and then, well, I could say buy the book, but there is quite a lot. There are downloadable articles on my personal website, which you just put, it's Zoltán Dörnyei.co.uk. No, zoltandörnyei.co.uk. And there are quite a few articles there on directed motivational currents. But what are they? Why did I get so excited about them? It was about 2 years ago when I realized that there's something in motivational psychology which we are not talking about, which is a crucial thing. And they are not talking about in second language motivational psychology, but neither do they talk about this phenomenon in mainstream educational psychology. And this is, the best thing is to give you a kind of personal example. This is the kind of thing when you are caught up in a project, when you, for a week or 2, you are totally sucked in, you are absorbed in it. When suddenly time starts flying and you hardly see your family so in a way you are absolutely engaged, and it's an incredibly productive period. You do a lot, much more than you expected to do, and at one point it ends and you get back to normal functioning. And and it's almost like you are longing back to it. You think that was nice, and you look forward to the next time. So what I wrote here is that these are specific periods when we seem to find ourselves in a particularly intensive state of focused productivity, which allows us to achieve a great deal, often much more than we would have believed possible at the outset. It's almost like we get into the zone. That's what my young colleagues whom I've been working with, a PhD student, actually 2 PhD students, Christine Muir and Zana Ibrahim, and a colleague in Sweden, Alistair Henry. Well, he's not Swedish, as you can guess by the name, but he lives there. And this is now, I'd like to actually illustrate this. And what I did was, I just put into Google, absorbed in a project, and this was, you know, you have something like 18,000 hits straight away. So this is obviously, this experience is well known to people. And, you know, I just took one, and literally this is not the best one. I kind of surfed the internet for a week to find one which fits the purpose. This was probably the third one in the row, and because it was okay, I never looked any further. And let me just read this out for you. The kind of work I do requires a lot of focus. There are some projects which require long periods of concentrated work. This is written by not a language specialist. This is a female computer programmer, as I found out later. But this is, it just had it's a kind of blog, and it was called Absorbed in a Project. You can be so absorbed in these projects that you lose all track of time. You fail to notice the pain in your back or that your shoulders ache until you stand up and realize that you have been hunched over the desk in some terrible position for hours. These projects leak into your daily life. You wake up with the solution to a problem. You are still solving equations in your head when driving the children to school. You try to hurry through cooking. Let me just see if I can get rid of this. No, it's even worse. Doesn't want to go anywhere. Okay, no, that's definitely not what we want. Okay, so these projects leak into your daily life. You wake up with the solution to a problem. You are still solving equations in your head when driving the children to school. You try to hurry through cooking dinner to give yourself time to check the results of some test. You're left running. You become obsessed. Now, this, for a motivational psychologist, is exciting, because look at, so now, so look at all those highlighted verbs: absorbs, lose all track of time, leak into your daily life, obsessed. We are talking here something which is incredibly intensive in terms of motivation, motivated behavior, motivated engagement. And, you know, I realized that I had never come across any theory in the field which would actually talk about this. And yet, I'm sure that quite a few of you already, for quite a few of you, it started to resonate. You can recognize this thing. You perhaps experienced it, or you know someone who has experienced it. And so this is something which is actually a known phenomenon. Now, to give you another thing, grand design. I'm sure that many of you have seen at least one episode. It's basically every single grand design episode if someone who has this kind of focused, mad, intensive engagement. And I have chosen one. This was one of in the first series, one of the most famous ones. A couple, a retired British couple, went to France, looked at the building on the left, bought the building, which used to be the headquarters of the partisans or the resistance movement in the 1945. The Germans actually blew it up or burnt it, and until about 10 years ago it was in that state, and then came this couple and they actually restored it to that level which you can see on the right. And Kevin MacLeod thought it was totally, they were bonkers, you know, and of course they succeeded. So that's the couple, and this is what Kevin actually said. So this is a word-for-word quote. It was broadcast in 1940, so 11 years ago. I never seem to be amazed by how when people get the bit between their teeth, they have this infinite capacity for hard work. I mean, here are Doug and Denny. They are working 100 hours a week, and yet they are really fired up by this project. They've got the mad glint in their eye. And it rubs off on you. It makes me want to come back and see how they are getting on. They only have 6 weeks now before they've got to get the ground and the first floor finished to take in some paying guests. And do you know, I think they've got a chance of doing it. And as we found out, they did. Now, this is the kind of phenomenon I'm talking about, and we decided to call it directed motivational currents. We spent literally about 2.5 months trying to think of the best term. You know, we went through a whole long list of, you know, phrases, currents, streams, you name it, with a flow, and we've tried it, because if you want to actually introduce a new kind of idea, it's really important that you get the name right, because, you know, that's sometimes it makes or breaks a theory. So there is a similar idea in psychology, quite different but similar, the flow idea. Some of you may have heard of it by Csikszentmihalyi. I think part of the success was, and it became a New York Times best-selling kind of idea, it was flow was a really good kind of name. He actually chose flow because he got that from the interviews. We chose the currents thing because some people actually talked about currents, but also because of the ocean currents. And especially what was in our mind's eye was Finding Nemo, the film, which probably many of you have seen, when this little fish wants to go to Australia, which is totally impossible for the little fish, unless he will actually get onto the Great Australian Current, which then carries the fish. So this is what we think, that what happens in these intensive periods, you somehow get into a motivational surge which will carry you, which has a formidable flow of energy, and it carries you just like ocean currents carry life forms. Now, what I want to say is, this is not simply high motivation. So you are very highly motivated, for example, before an exam, an entrance exam, or something, or simply you are interested in the subject. This is a burst. It's relatively short term, very intensive, and it's over and above the steady motivation which a good student will exhibit throughout the year. So, you might ask, why are we interested in it? If it's not that common, and it's not very long term, what is the attraction, in these things? Besides that they are interesting, and we do experience these things, and some of the greatest achievements, in life probably are achieved through, while you are in the current. But why does it have a broader relevance? And this is what I'd like to argue that it does, because I am now getting fully convinced that it's a little bit like this. The components, the factors which cause this surge are there in every long-term motivational sequence. So it's the same principles. It's just that when things come together in a particularly harmonious way, suddenly it's almost like there's a spacecraft which is going already fast, and when some things come together, it goes into hyperdrive, in Star Wars. That's exactly what I think that, well, that's not exactly what I think that it's like Star Wars, but it's basically the optimal form of long-term motivated behavior, that, what we are talking about. And when this optimal form happens, then you get into this super hyper surge, but then it slows down, and yet the same factors will actually drive you in normal drive. So if we can understand these surges, they are almost like the prime examples of a phenomenon, then we can understand long-term motivation for our students, and again something which psychology has been incredibly kind of, what's the word, slack about. psychology, motivational psychology, virtually never talks about long-term motivation. Whereas for us, language teachers, and I count myself, I started out as a language teacher and I still feel a language teacher at heart. Really, we know that the key to the success is keeping up the momentum for a very long time in many cases. Certainly months, but most often years, and then you can even talk about lifetime learning. Okay? So, a brief description of what are the key components of such a motivational current. And there are four, what we found was that there are four kind of almost like key elements or components of this equation. And this book has got, there are all, can you see there are these gray things, gray lines. They are all, it's full of those gray lines. Well, I can't see now any, but yeah, there are lots of it. Look at that. They are all real voices by learners and teachers. So what we did was, this book is based on qualitative research, and this is why I invited Alistair Henry to be a co-author, because he's an excellent qualitative researcher. But of course the book is for practitioners, so we didn't present it as qualitative research, just illustrative voices. But we actually listened to loads of people. And you know what happened? We just put on my website first an initial kind of PowerPoint and initial little blurb on it, and then one article which I've written with Christine, and we started to receive emails. People saying, from Australia, for example, one of our best examples is from Australia. Jessica emailed saying, this is exactly how I live my life. This is, and it turned from Hungary, people I never knew. I've been living in Britain for 17 years. We got, and those people were very keen to be interviewed, so their voices went into it. So we just had this, the wealth of data we had after a while was incredible. So, I'm going to talk briefly about these four components before we'll see how they actually can fit into a language program, because in motivational psychology, it's almost always the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So we do a lot of research on motivation, but quite frankly, for our purpose, the whole thing is only relevant if we can then help to motivate the students. And recently I started to think that teachers need also motivation. So, just one slide about goals and visions, because I wanted to stop myself. I've written with a former student of mine, Maggie, I've written a whole book recently on vision. I really believe that vision is a key thing. So a goal and a vision is a key thing. DMCs are almost like vision plus. So a DMC, a directed motivational current, is a direct follow-up of vision. What I mean by goals and vision, you know what goals are? Goals are abstract. If you add some kind of imagery aspect, then you get vision. So your goal might be to be a doctor, but if you not just think that, oh, I'd like to be a doctor, but imagine yourself being a doctor, healing people, or imagine yourself walking up to the podium and receiving your degree, or, that's when it becomes vision in the scientific sense. Vision is used, of course, everywhere in the world, for also, mainly instead of mission statement or mission, or, every international company has a vision statement, and every politician has a vision. That's not what we are talking about. A vision is related to mental imagery, so it's almost like your goal. And now, the reason why I mention vision and not just goals is because visions tend to be stronger than goals. There are certain goals which can be really strong as well, so, and in the book we talk about that. But basically for a directed motivational current, you need direction. Just like all the ocean currents, they don't just go at random. They have very, very straightforward, they go from there to there. So the Gulf, course goes from, starts in Florida and ends up in kind of Northern Europe-ish, one. So you need this kind of goal, partly because that gives meaning to things, but partly goals are very important to keep behavior kind of together, to keep the focus, to orientate. And I didn't want to say more about it because I think this is the most well-known, the best-known part of this. Okay, so that's my only slide about goals and visions. But you need that. So these DMCs do not just happen, and you just, wow, gee, I have a DMC. You are already very, very highly motivated and goal-oriented. The spacecraft is already going quite fast, moving towards a direction when it goes into hyperdrive. Now, interestingly, every single time when there's a DMC, people know when it started. But not just know that it started about 3 months ago. In most cases, they know exactly the moment, the minute which triggered it off. So, and we talked to people again and again, and this became very clear that this was our original hunch because, we are talking, based on the Gulf Stream and our own experiences, but this was totally confirmed. And I just listed a few things. An occasion for action, a long-awaited opportunity. So something just happens which is almost like the final little piece of jigsaw in the puzzle. Things come together. Like, for example, diet is a thing which very often is related, a successful diet with a DMC. And I can tell you from my experience, about 4 years ago, I decided that I needed to go on, a stricter health regime. Things. The conference lunches were just too good, and dinners and things. And sitting in front of the computer, you know exactly how it goes. And but that was one of those things which I just kept talking about without doing anything. And then at one point, suddenly there was an invitation from the local gym, and I realized there was a local gym, just walking distance. And my sons just happened to reach the age when they became interested. They became vain, they wanted to develop their bodies so that they could flash their bodies, I suppose, And so everything came together. We started to go to the gym together. And guess what? I'm still going, not as frequently, but it's okay. Sometimes the discovery of a missing piece of information, a eureka moment, sometimes a specific cause to arms. But what's very interesting, the last one, about half or almost 2/3 of the cases in which we interviewed, the people, they said that the initial trigger was a negative experience. So, for example, a humiliation, and when they wanted afterwards to prove themselves, So one of our best, informants, Esther from Hungary, she actually was humiliated by the PE teacher, that she couldn't do push-ups, And so she started to take up Taekwondo, one of those, and just so that she could see the next time the teacher's face. And the teacher did pick up on her 2 months later, and she did twice as many push-ups. And then she became a black belt, the first female black belt apparently in her category. So it did actually trigger off something even bigger. Okay. This is when it becomes really interesting, because again, it's a nice story, these triggering things, but again, it's very straightforward. Here is the point, that what I believe is the reason why a DMC is different from other motivated behavioral sequences is because it's almost like, it's not just in car terms, it's not just a standard car where you drive and you use up petrol or fuel. You do something and you use up motivation. But it's like a hybrid car which while you do it, you generate new motivation. So it's almost like a self-propelling thing. You know, so it's not driven necessarily by the initial commitment, which is in almost all cases in motivational psychology, we have to start out with an initial level of motivation, and motivating people means creating this initial motivation. It's almost like filling up the tank of the car, and once the car is filled up and you manage to switch on the engine, then off they go. That's basically motivational psychology, except in this case. This is like a hybrid car. You have the initial goal and vision, you have the triggering factor, you start moving, so far everything seems to be okay, and then the sequence itself starts driving itself for a while. And that is totally, totally unique and very exciting. So if you look at the second bullet point, you know, in practice, the current is strengthened in an ongoing manner, and its flow is maintained by various structural properties. And I wanted to highlight here basically two of these properties: behavioral routines and progress checks. And bear with me, these are the best terms we could find for these things, but they become quite clear. A behavioral routine is something which you make part of, a kind of behavior which you make a regular part of your life, so which doesn't actually require motivational processing. So in the morning, when you go to the bathroom and brush your teeth, you do not actually typically have a cost, you know, conduct a cost-benefit calculation whether you should do that. You know, is it worth the effort, okay? Sometimes in the evening you do when you are really tired, but but it's part of it. So, and actually quite a lot of our life consists of kind of automatized behavioral sequences where we just do them because that's part of the life. And we can call those motivational autopilot. You get on those, okay? So what we found was that as soon as there is a DMC, people immediately start building in these little routines. So if it's a health-related thing, you immediately set times you do something. If it's a language-related DMC, again, you immediately say, I'm going to listen to the BBC News. This is a true thing from someone learning English in Kurdistan. BBC News from 8 to 10 in the morning, or 8 to 9 every morning. I'm going to do this. I'm going to regularly meet. So you set up regular kind of, you know, behaviors so that, you know, they will actually become part of things, and you don't have to almost worry about them. They are now there. And that's what we do in any time when we get into these projects. Okay? So those are very important. What are probably even more important is the progress checks. Now, the best way to describe these things is if you think about a diet which is going well. Every morning you step on the scales. That's the progress check. And if the scales are nicely, you know, the figure is going nicely down, that fills you with energy. So that is actually almost like, you know, the fuel for the day. Motivational psychology knew partly about this. There was this standard theory of goal theory that there are distant goals, but they can be a bit too distant to motivate you for a long time. So it's better if you break it up into sub-goals, and then you actually, there's always something concrete to go for. This is, I don't know how many of you, probably all of you know about the Duke of Edinburgh Prize, you know, here, and awards here, where they basically want to keep young people motivated for years, literally years. So what did they do? They did this stepwise award scheme, you know, that there are 3 awards. For each you have to do modules, so sub-goals. So someone is always moving towards a goal. Now, that's very good from a goal perspective, And because goals provide standards and so on, but it's the bottom, the bottom line which is important. Sub-goals provide ideal opportunities for progress checks, because if you meet a goal, then suddenly that's almost like feedback, positive feedback. So you want a kind of sequence where you get these explicit, positive kind of reinforcing feedback. And that's one really important thing. I'm going to give you examples when we look at the 7 frameworks. And of course, affirmative feedback is one of the best ways of doing it. But this is not the kind of teacher feedback, that's kind of, great, you've done wonderfully, go girl, this kind of very empty thing, which actually psychology says it's not very useful. When you say great to say everything, then students will very soon realize that, it doesn't mean much. It's just a kind of nice atmosphere kind of thing. You want is progress checks, it's affirmative feedback, which is basically saying, you've done really well because I can see that you have now mastered this, or you have got that far. So it's informative kind of feedback, okay? And as you can see, I think I found, as all my illustrations, they are nicked from, the internet. I'm just hoping nobody will ever find them. But that's a good one, because that's exactly what happens, that while you get these, this kind of affirmative, positive feedback, your motivation just keeps soaring, and it's increasing. And finally, I'd like to talk about something which was probably the most personal thing for me, and that's why there is Jack Kerouac on the road. That's what fully convinced me that this is important. And they say that theory and science is not related to personal experiences. I doubt it. I think everybody will believe in things if they have actually experienced it. So this is what happened to me when I was 18. I was living in Hungary, and my favorite book was On the Road by Jack Kerouac. So I thought that the meaning of life was well summarized in that book, that it's to drive from New York to San Francisco and back. And I thought, this is really what life should be about, constantly on the move. And it sounds funny, but that's actually beat literature for you. And I became 18, and suddenly I could actually prepare for my, start learning to drive myself. And I was ecstatic, that by the opportunity. This was for me, and I thought that, and then I can probably drive from Budapest to Pécs, which doesn't sound as exciting, it's about 120 miles. But, I thought, and that would be great. And then I'll return by car to Budapest, and then life will be nice. Now, the important thing is not this, but the fact is that, in each of these driving tests, it starts with the theory part. And the theory part in Hungary was just as dreary, actually even more dreary than the theory part now in Britain. You had to memorize what speed you can tow a caravan on a bridge, if it's, dual carriageway, and then, that kind of thing. And what I still remember that I enjoyed it. In fact, I enjoyed it exactly as reading the highway code, as much as I enjoyed reading the book On the Road by Kerouac. And I even remember now, and that was a long time ago, that I thought I was weird about that. That you shouldn't enjoy reading it. And then it was one of those things which you just stored in your memory and then didn't come back to, but now I realize what happened. There is, related to a DMC is some kind of, a base, a fundamental, profound feeling of joy. Here is a quote, from the book, from our North African woman who actually emigrated to Sweden. And when she got into a big DMC learning Swedish, wonderfully beautiful, and she said, excitement you cannot explain. I think it's like, I don't know, it's fun and strange actually, because I'm an adult, but you feel like a child. You know, you can tell from this, you know, this incoherence that this is something more than just I'm pleased with myself because I'm doing well. So, and then I realized, based on my experience, what we found, in a DMC, even boring tasks become enjoyable. This is where we depart from Csikszentmihalyi's flow in a big way. If you don't know what flow is, don't worry about it. But basically, a DMC concerns a long sequence, weeks, months, years sometimes, which is, you know, which is made up of tasks very often which are not enjoyable in themselves. Tedious things, memorizing things, drilling, you know, practicing. And yet, all tasks along a DMC pathway are perceived as enjoyable because they transport an individual towards a highly valued end goal. And this is when I started to understand this, that when I enjoyed learning, studying the highway code, it was because the overall passion of reaching the goal almost kind of was reproduced backwards. It permeated the whole process. So every single task which you do actually almost carries the same passion, and this is in a fractal manner. You know, again, if you don't know what this fractal manner is, you know, I first heard it from Diane Larson Freeman, and at a conference she loves it. And it's one of those things when every component of a bigger thing, like a beehive, every component actually is very similar to the whole big. So every single part which makes up a big thing is identical almost as the bigger part. And apparently it's a very exciting thing for a lot of scientists. Now, we find this here. Now, we started to think about DMCs in classroom settings. And what we realized was that there was a close parallel. It's not exactly the same, but group projects are the closest. So project work, project learning. Now, project learning has been around now for decades, probably 2 or 3 decades in educational psychology, in motivation, not motivation, in language learning methodology. We have books called Project Learning. They have their ups and downs. Sometimes they are more trendy. They went out of fashion in the 90s. They are coming back in educational psychology again because technology is very, you know, useful for project work. So with all this high technology, again, there is a realistic thing. But what we are saying is that it's almost like DMC, and what we are suggesting is project work plus. So project work in a more principled ways. Now, DMC in classroom settings is like this. An ideal project template will encompass all the key components of the DMC construct, which are a clearly defined target, you know, the goal, vision, something which is related to your inner identity, a structure. Projects have structures, goals, regular checks. You know, there are progress markers with well-run projects, you know, regular feedback sessions, stock-taking sessions. And positive emotionality, which very often doesn't come, that's a difference from a real DMC, doesn't come from the target, because the target very often is not so exciting. Sometimes it is, you know, when students actually put on a performance, or organize an event or something. It can be, but sometimes it isn't. They just have to produce, let's say, a display on the wall. That won't fill you with joy day and night. But it's the working in a supportive group, in a cohesive, well-established group, is very enjoyable. You know, if you think back of your school days, I bet that some of the nicest experiences were when you did something specific with a bunch of other schoolmates, and you were almost brothers and sisters in arms, that kind of thing. That can give you the emotional thing. Here are the frameworks. And as you can see, The first sign for me that 5 minutes left will come in about 2 minutes. So I won't be able to go through these in detail, but I have enough time just to give you an idea. So it's rather annoying, that thing, but it won't go away. Will it?
Yes, we'll try.
No? Oops.
So quicker.
Ah.
Is that far enough?
Yes.
No, we need to go back. So.
Yes. Thank you.
Not that. Still not completely.
But you can. It's a letter S which is covered.
Yeah.
Ah.
Stick it over there. That might be
Thank
better.
you. This should have been done probably at the very beginning. Okay. So what we have is we call 7 frameworks. So 7 powerful ways of creating long-term engagement in the classroom. And we gave them fancy names so that the labels actually speak for themselves. There's a short description here. In the book there is a bit longer descriptions, but this is how far we got. I really believe in this power, and I believe that over the next few years we'll be able to put much more flesh on the bone. You know. So the first one is all eyes on the final product. This is when there is a really powerful end goal and a vision. And even in classroom settings, you can have that. For example, you know, Christine, my PhD student, her PhD study concerns a project in Australia in an EAP settings, exactly the same settings, where the students had to organize a charity event. You know, so they did, it was some Birdie Foundations related to health. I think it was something to do with cancer. And they collected over $3,000 for it. So it was actually a proper thing. But during that time, they had to kind of almost like galvanize the whole language school, had to talk to various kind of stakeholders, had to actually negotiate with even authorities because they were putting up programs. You know, it was perfect EAP practice, and yet at the time there was this thing that they were doing something really, really important. They actually invested about 50 times as much energy in those. It was a 5-week course. In Australia, in that university, they had 5-week kind of modules. And during those 5 weeks, they said afterwards that they never worked so hard on their language, you know, because... So that was the first. Step by step. This is already mentioned. That's when you set up a very attractive, you know, something which in psychology sometimes you call a contingent path, where you need to reach a step so that you can then qualify for the next one, and it's an incremental thing, and you are moving forward with very, very straightforward progress markers. The Duke of Edinburgh award scheme has got the, you know, the bronze, the silver, and the gold stages awards, and in each of them you have the various sub-modules which you have to kind of achieve. The big issue, sometimes there's a huge, massive driving issue. So I suppose when they raised tuition fees in England, you could have easily produced a project around this, students actually organizing something around it, debating something, or, you know, that was an issue which was in everybody's mind. Actually, students did organize these things themselves. You know, they were marching all over the place, along with the teachers very often. So that's the kind of thing which, again, can motivate people long run. Or that's me, which is related to this, but not a big social issue, but rather something like something which clearly matters, core identity. So let's say for some young women, I know that you know, we have a strong gender and language kind of strand in our School of English, and we've got some really nice female teachers, and when they have a really nice female class, my goodness, they get into a DMC and sisters, you know, together, and because it's a core identity issue, you know, their gender identity, but there are lots of other identities, you know, like faith identities, beliefs in certain core principles. Even environmental protection is important to someone, but certainly animals, things. Yeah. So again, there could be something which is really taps into a person. Detective work, it's a classic. You always have this kind of thing that people enjoy sorting out problems, and they can actually spend a lot of time doing, crosswords and, and puzzles and things. We can capitalize on that. Story sequels. We love, soap operas, things with sequences. Again, yeah, a really nice project which we heard of was with primary school children, where there was a gradually unfolding story which kept the children on track for a whole semester or term, and the classes were built around the storyline, kind of spin-offs. Finally, study abroad, which is the most language-specific thing. It's amazing. My son, who is studying now Japanese here at this university, became interested because in year 7 they promised that the best students will be able to go to Japan for 10 days in year 9. 10 days was enough of a bribe for him in 2 years' time to actually get into it, and then he liked it, so that's the rest of it. But study abroad can be much more effective than what we actually make of it. So I've got very little time left, and this is not, okay. So conclusion. A DMC is an intense motivational pathway which occurs when a variety of time and context-related factors come together in an individual to prompt a firm decision to pursue a goal, vision, which is considered personally significant, highly relevant to one's desired identity, and emotionally satisfying. Can you see I try to include everything in one sentence? That's the... Oh, satisfying, full stop. That was the sentence. And then a DMC can be seen as the optimal form of engagement with long-term projects, and therefore it offers the blueprint of long-term motivation, which is why theoretically I think is also very interesting. And this is the final slide. I believe that the use of project frameworks along the lines of the samples provided can generate DMC-like sustained motivational currents in the language classroom. Now, while the challenges involved in this way of teaching may be many, so too are the rewards of working with the resulting classes of exceptionally motivated language learners. And this is it. You can create this. We've seen many examples when some teachers did. It takes work. It takes a different way of thinking. But my goodness, the result is, you have a class of enthusiastic students. That's worth quite a lot. We spend most of our lives not with not so enthusiastic students. So finally, just to remind you of sunshine in this weather. Okay? Thank you very much for your attention.